Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. You're listening to Living in Mexico. We've been broadcasting since for 20 years now, almost every weekend. So I really appreciate you joining us. This has been a very busy week in Mexico, and we've been focusing a lot on security issues. And of course, there's a lot of conversation regarding what is going to happen with with the negotiation of a security accord between the United States and Mexico that is supposed to be taking place right now. The negotiation is supposed to be taking place right now, but more importantly, there should be in the near future a visit by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and part of this has to do with an agreement, a security agreement. And I guess we're kind of like losing or forgetting that there's also a trade agreement that needs to be renegotiated, and there has to be we need to establish what's going to happen with all these aranceles, these tariffs that the United States is threatening to impose on Mexican exports to the United States. Anyway, to put into context and to give us an update as to what is happening, joining us today again is Dr. Juan Carlos Baker. He is a professor, but more importantly, he was a deputy at the Ministry or the Secretary of Commerce, had participated in the negotiations of the USMCA when it was being negotiated through the Peña Nieto administration, and also was very knowledgeable of how the negotiation of NAFTA took place, like seems like 1,000 years ago. Oh, Juan Carlos, welcome to the show. Where are we with the United States? I mean, they gave Mexico, supposedly the White House, Donald Trump, 90 more days to reach an agreement on some of the tariffs, but also in addition to, I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, to initiate or start talking about the renegotiation of the USMCA, which is this agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So just could you remind us where we are right now? Because I am truly confused. Welcome to the show.
Ana Maria, thank you again for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you. You're not alone, eh? Don't feel bad
Okay, thank
about
you.
about being confused or being perhaps misled on one thing seeming or looking clear today, but absolutely opaque the next day. That happens very often, I'm afraid. But I think that you're right. I mean, the last few days have been more concentrated, news-wise, has been more concentrated probably on what's happening with security. If certain drug cartel leaders were extradited to the United States, or if there is this talk about unilateral military interventions from the U.S. on Mexico, especially given what's happening in Venezuela. There are like ships going around the Venezuela coast as we speak. So all of that naturally has moved the attention more towards security. But it is somewhat related to trade because of this. If we looked at the several attempts in the recent past, that President Trump has imposed or threatened to impose tariffs on Mexico, several of the reasons that he has given are more related to security and more related to actions that Mexico has taken or has not taken, rather, on security rather than trade itself. So in that sense, yes, the fact that are these discussions ongoing on security, whose result we can only expect it to be, positive grounds, should influence positively on the outcome of the talks that are also happening simultaneously on the trade angle. Now, on the trade angle, assuming that everything goes well on security and that nothing else sort of pollutes the discussion on trade, from that perspective, from the trade perspective, there are two processes now currently open. One of them is the one that was announced by President Trump and President Sheinbaum back in July 31st, that stated that for another 90 days, which will take us to November the 1st, and Mexico and the US are going to talk about ways to deepen bilateral trade and to address non-tariff barriers. That's very cryptic language that we all see in the communiques and statements. But basically, the result of that conversation back in July 31st was that Mexico was not going to be punished quote unquote, with more tariffs, but rather during 90 days, Mexico and the US were going to talk about what non-tariff barriers could be solved. That result is partially good. And sorry to start raining on anybody's parade, but what I'm trying to say is that I mean, it is good that we are not facing any additional extra tariffs, as probably Canada, which Canada had 25%, and then it was increased to 35%. That was not the case for Mexico. But we should remember that under the USMCA, Mexico should actually be facing no tariffs whatsoever. So you really are talking about the lesser.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
right.
why are we discussing tariff? What is it? I mean, we have the USMCA. Why are we discussing tariffs?
Because that's also where the second process is going to connect. I just mentioned that there are two processes. One of them is this sort of informal process, if you wish, that is happening with this 90-day threshold or horizon, which currently is the clock is ticking on that one right now. Now, the more formal institutional process, if you wish, is the actual review renegotiation of the USMCA,
Right.
which, as you and I have spoken before in your program, it is scheduled to take place on July the 1st, 2026. But in order to be ready for that moment in the future, countries need to start working ahead of time in, putting together ideas and conducting consultations and, so listening to what the people have to say about the USMCA. Now, in the case of the US and Mexico, that process should be starting sometime during the fall, maybe late September, maybe sometime in October, right? In order to be ready by July the 1st, 2026. So what this means, when you see the two processes in tandem, what this means is that there are two processes which are going to be converging in the real very short time. The informal process where the US is pressing on Mexico to address or to solve, again, quote unquote, issues that are important for the US, but without the formality or without the dialogue and transparency instances that exist in the formal process of the USMCA. So again, this could be flexible, could be useful if you wish to sort of
It could go faster. Potentially, it could go faster,
it
right?
could go faster. It could be also a process that, sort of disseminates or dissipates the uncertainty of markets and economic actors because you do it very quickly. And, even if it's not the ideal agreement, it is an agreement, correct? Those are like the upsides of the fact that these two processes are converging. Probably the negative side or the downside of that is that, well, for what we're seeing, the intention of the US in those processes, the one informal with Mexico, but also with others that the US has conducted with Canada and Japan and Korea and other countries, is that the US is moving more towards protectionist, closed market, non-free trade agreements, right? And Mexico could probably be sort of caught in that crossfire. If you want a deal quickly that addresses all this uncertainty and leaves the energy and the appetite of the government to be channeled somewhere else, then the price for that quick agreement is going to be that free trade probably is going to be no more. If you really go about the formal institutional sort of grand scheme process, well, that is going to take longer, and the result might be probably more complicated in the sense of the hurdles that very likely we are going to be facing in the next, I don't know, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. I don't know. It's an open question.
So let me ask you, let me ask you this. In terms of this process, the idea would be that the United States is already in discussions with the Mexican government on potential changes to the USMCA, right? But at the same time is conversing or discussing with the Mexican government a security agreement that would satisfy the White House that seems to believe that Mexico has not done enough in order to go after these criminal organizations that now the United States considers terrorist group. And there is also a sense that Mexico has to be doing more, and otherwise there's going to be sanctions, and among the sanctions would be tariffs. So I'm just trying to figure out where the negotiation of the USMCA process melds in with these threats of sanctions, not because there's a problem with the trade agreement, but there is a problem in something that is completely different, which has to do with security and political issues. So how does this all meld in? How does this all fall into place in 90 days?
Uh, well, well, first of all, to assume that everything is going to be squared out in 90 days is just too
It's a
optimistic.
mistake. It's not going to happen. I
It's not
mean,
going to happen.
no, it's not going
I
to happen.
believe that what is more likely is that in those 90 days, whether that is security or trade, it doesn't matter. What, realistically speaking, the two governments could be discussing is what is the working agenda going forward. That you establish certain commitments, that you establish certain metrics to measure whether or not you are successful in meeting those objectives, and then some sort of timeline in the near future to be, having these regular stock taking checkpoints, so to speak, right? I don't expect that in 90 days, the US and Mexico are going to come out publicly saying we solved everything. That's not really something that I see happening. However, in the way that the agenda is constructed, I believe is precisely where we are going to see that point that you mentioned, where the two agendas or the two realms, security and trade, are going to start melting. Because progress in security might imply that the US is more willing to play ball, if you allow me the expression, with Mexico on the trade angle, right?
Right.
So, for example, maybe cutting down a couple of points on the percentage of on the tariff that cars have to pay, right? So it's not going to be 25%, it's going to be 10%. Why? Because you helped me out in security and we are good friends now, right? On the contrary, if it doesn't happen, then maybe we'll have to be paying that tariff for an undetermined period of time in the future, right? So I think that I definitely I would much rather prefer that the two items, security and trade, are addressed independently in sort of self-contained boxes, but that is also not possible right now. The reality is that even before Donald Trump came back to the White House, the previous administration always sort of played, if you wish, with migration as a great
Biden, yeah.
leverage puller
Yeah.
against back then the White House of President Biden. So in this sense now, the fact that security, migration, fentanyl, what have you, is all mixed together with trade, well, it's just a continuation of something that we've been seeing for a few years now. Now, having said all of that, I believe that by itself, making progress in security is something that we should aspire to. I mean, Mexico most definitely
Yeah.
has a pending agenda on security that
Mhm.
should be addressed because of the Mexican citizens and how they are sort of exposed to all of this.
Right.
But if we do it because the US is pressing and at the same time we sort of fix certain trade problems, look, at this moment, at least for me,
That's okay.
whatever does the
Whatever it
trick,
takes.
yeah,
You know,
I'm happy with it.
yeah, I wrote a piece, an op-ed piece for El Financiero, which basically kind of suggested to President Claudia Sheinbaum, you know what? The United States is going to pressure Mexico. So you might as well use that pressure to threaten the criminal organizations and say, you guys better start behaving, or at least just reduce the violence against the civilian population. Otherwise, if we grab you, we being Mexico and the US, we're just going to put a bow on you and just send you to the United States. I mean, threatening cartel leaders is can be dangerous, but at the same time, it's a reality. I mean, Mexico is basically being pressured to deliver many of these individuals that are just creating havoc in different parts of the country. So I don't know how that's going to work out. Let me just ask you one last question. What can we expect in the next couple of weeks in terms of moving forward with this negotiation and trying to understand what is going to change with the USMCA? I mean, what does the United States want that they don't have right now with the USMCA, or what they're doing right now, just threatening with these tariffs? In fact, without citing the USMCA, I mean, they're just threatening every day with different kinds of sanctions. So what does the United States want from the USMCA?
Well,
You
honestly,
sound very frustrated, Juan Carlos.
no, no, no.
Joining us today is Juan Carlos Baker.
No, no, no. It's just that it's just that that is a question actually that I had myself asked time and time again.
Mhm.
Obviously, I have no way of knowing.
Now, you
Because,
negotiated with Trump's
no,
team
no, yes,
and
of
these
course.
people, the USMCA. Any inkling what they would want that they don't
I,
have right now?
I was getting there. Without really any certainty, because there's no certainty in this, but
Hmm.
without really just educated guesses.
Hmm.
I think that the US will very likely try to incorporate or to have in the USMCA context the discussion about the deficit. I mean, the US has been obviously
Mm.
obsessed by the trade deficit for a long time.
It's a
Well,
good
Trump
point.
has.
Yeah.
And given that Mexico is the largest trading partner and we have not the most important surplus deficit on the
Hmm.
US side, other countries have
Hmm.
larger deficits or surpluses with the US,
Hmm.
but ours is important. So I wouldn't be surprised if the US wishes to establish certain sort of safeguards in the agreement that guarantee in their minds that the deficit is not going to run wild out of control. Now, how is that going to be technically reflected in the agreement? I don't
Hmm.
know, but that's an objective that they will probably likely push. I also
That's
think that the other big item will be China. I believe that Mexico,
yeah.
that the US will try to force Mexico to align its China policies as much as what Washington is doing. And the best way for the US to do so is to force Mexico to undertake mandatory USMCA commitments. Because that
Hmm.
way, the two things are linked. If you,
Hmm.
at any point, it will be sort of the thinking that I imagine people going down in USTR are having right
Hmm.
now. We need to make sure that Mexico never considers going Chinese, if you allow me the expression, because
Huh.
that would imply jeopardizing the relationship that it has with us at the USMCA level, right?
Wow.
Again, no idea how that will be technically reflected, but those are
Hmm.
probably the two things that come to mind. That's probably something that the US would like Mexico to do,
Hmm.
and that presently are not reflected at all in the current USMCA text.
Wow. Well, we still have what, a month, 2 months away, I guess. I mean, at this point, you just never know what's going to happen in this uh 90-day threat that was presented by the United States. I really appreciate you joining us today and here and living in Mexico. You sound a little frustrated. I can understand. I'm very confused, but I have a little better understanding at what as to what could potentially happen. Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. Juan Carlos Baker, he was the former deputy at the Ministry of Economy here in Mexico. He was led the negotiation of the USMCA when Donald Trump was the first time around. Thank you so much for joining us.
Here's one.
Let's go to commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar.